Hi, I'm Dr. Drew, a physical therapist with a practice built on the belief that movement is medicine. And today, we're talking about ACL tears in the knee. The why, the how, and the whom. The reasons behind why ACL tears have become such an epidemic. An anterior cruciate ligament tear, commonly known as an ACL tear, is one of the most common injuries an athlete can experience, and it's no walk in the park. Up to 50% of all ACL injuries will result in reconstructive surgery, only to lead to re-injury 13.8% of the time, according to a 2017 study. The cycle is painful, challenging, and costly, which is why focus is shifting towards the effectiveness of ACL injury prevention programs as a preferred proactive alternative. Before we dive into recovery and prevention, let's talk about why all of these ACL injuries are occurring, and to whom. There are an estimated 350,000 ACL tears each year in the United States alone. It's an extremely common injury for athletes, and 2 to 8 times more likely in young females. Part of what makes ACL tears so common is that the majority of them occur as a result of normal, everyday athletic movements. Roughly 70% of all ACL tears are non-contact, which means they're not happening because of a collision or any type of rough play. Most of these injuries are the result of an athlete's own physical mechanics. A study from the year 2000 examined the exact mechanisms of ACL tears and found that most were occurring from common movements like landing a jump or pivoting to change directions. The observer studied videotapes of their patients and noticed that in most non-contact injuries, the knee was almost fully extended at the time of injury. Strong force to the extended knee strains the ACL, potentially causing it to tear. Another study from 2019 looked at the mechanism of ACL injuries, specifically in baseball players. The majority of these ACL tears were from fielding and base running, 2 non-contact processes that again require sudden deceleration and pivoting. You can see why sports like basketball, tennis, and soccer see a higher rate of ACL tears. All of these games call for movements that regularly put pressure on the ACL. The increased risk of injury for female athletes is explained by differences in biomechanics. In 2010, a study that looked at the mechanisms and risk factors for ACL tears distinguished knee abduction as the main risk factor for females, followed by joint laxity, hyperextension, and a history of ACL reconstruction. The evidence shows that ACL injuries are bound to happen in some cases. If and when they do, about half of active patients will need to get a delayed reconstruction of the ACL, according to a 2015 study. Unfortunately, not every patient that undergoes reconstructive surgery will end up feeling and performing as good as new. Around 60% of athletes will be unable to return to their previous level of performance, and up to 90% of patients end up with knee osteoarthritis in the long term. Young patients are also 7 times more likely to re-injure their ACL if they return to the sport within 9 months of their surgery, according to a 2020 report. On top of that, patients will spend an average of $9,399.49 on the surgery alone, according to a 2017 study on the cost of outpatient arthroscopic ACL reconstruction, all to find out that the surgery may be ineffectual. With such uncertain results and such high costs to the patients, the general consensus is that prevention is better than reaction. Because the main cause of ACL tears is biomechanical, athletes can learn how to make safer, more controlled movements that won't strain the ACL. Prevention programs are designed to target the movements that pose the highest risk by training athletes in a way that strengthens the muscles and tendons involved in each. Training leads to changes in biomechanical and neuromuscular patterns, so athletes have more control in the way they jump or pivot. In 2005, a group published a study that had been conducted 5 years early in order to determine whether prevention training could reduce the number of ACL injuries in female athletes. The study took a group of female soccer players aged 14 to 18 and put them through preventative training, then compared the results to a control group of female players in the same age and skill match who did not receive this training. They did this twice, once with a group in 2000 and again with another group in 2001. In both cases, they found that there was an enormous decrease in the frequency of ACL tears in the group that underwent the preventative training. There were 88% less ACL tears for the experimental group in 2000, and 74% less injuries in the experimental group in 2001. Another study, called Effectiveness of Anterior Cruciate Ligament Injury Prevention Training Programs, concluded that ACL prevention can reduce risk of injury by 52% in females and 85% in males. Across the board, ACL prevention programs have demonstrated proven effectiveness. The best plan for dealing with an ACL tear is to prevent it from happening in the first place. And that's what the ACL Injury Prevention Program